Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and friends of Baylor. My sister was asking me about a lot of questions, and I have been putting this off for literally months because I didn't want to get into questions about lifestyle and healthy aging, because frankly the science isn't keeping up with sort of the popular interest in this. But since there are a lot of questions, I'm gonna actually try and answer some of the ones you sent in. Now, these aren't great answers, but I'm going to have to spend some time explaining about some of these studies. So I probably ought to first apologize to all the epidemiologists and statisticians out there. Hopefully none of them are watching because of my explanation for studies is often weird. So I got a question. This was one that was sent in. Does eating fruits and vegetables daily really make a difference? Well, in order to understand that, you have to look at the types of studies. So there was a very large-scale study done at Harvard that involved 2 million people, and the study looked at 2 prospective studies and 26 cohort studies were all pushed together in what was called a meta-analysis. But to understand this, you have to understand what studies can and cannot do. So a cohort study is an observational study that takes a group of people with some similarities and over time assesses some outcome. And if you take a group of people and you look back on well, how many people had this or that, that's a retrospective study, and how many people are going to develop something, that's a prospective study. So here's a good example for a group of workers exposed to asbestos versus not exposed. Do they develop lung disease? Well, if you go back and look at the number of people exposed, that's a retrospective study. If you think about we're going to follow them for 20 years, that's a prospective study. So let's go to look at that Harvard study. So they looked at these 2 prospective and 26 cohort studies, and what they found was 5 servings per day, 2 fruits and 3 vegetables, was linked to 13% lower risk of death from any cause, 12% lower risk of heart disease or stroke, 10% lower risk of cancer, and 35% lower risk of respiratory disease. And they suggested, based on all these studies, that leafy greens such as spinach and kale, citrus fruits, berries, and carrots, which are rich in antioxidants like vitamin C and beta-carotene, were the most useful. They showed that if you had more than 5 servings, it really didn't make any difference. Okay. First of all, if you want a tip on cooking kale, I strongly recommend that you mix it with olive oil because that allows you to slide it off the plate into the garbage can more easily. Little tip, cooking tip on how to deal with kale. So, does this study prove that eating 5 servings of fruits and vegetables is beneficial? Well, no, it doesn't, because people who like to eat like grazing cows might do other things like do yoga and exercise and stuff like that. So a cohort study cannot actually show that it's beneficial, but it is associated with. So there are associations between exposures and outcomes that you can do. You can also assess temporal relationships, like if you do something now, will it happen later? But it doesn't necessarily say it's causal. It doesn't say because you eat those vegetables, it's the reason why. So they can never prove causal relationships. And they're often very subject to a number of different biases. So for example, selection bias is very common in cohort studies because just imagine a study that is examining exercise and reducing heart disease. So we want to do that study. And we would recruit patients by putting up a sign in a gym or an exercise facility to recruit people, or in the newspaper. The trouble is, if you select people that way, the folks who enroll because they're going to the gym might have a completely different lifestyle than the people who enrolled because they saw the advertisement. And unless you match the people up, you might believe that exercise is beneficial, and yet it's confounded by the fact that the reason it's beneficial is because you have so many other things going on. One of the most common mistakes is and I mentioned this last week, is the anti-vax movement kind of uses this, which is an informational bias. So in one study, if you do controls at a particular time and the information about this disease changes, and you don't account for that, then you can have that as a complication of your study. So classic example is the hepatitis B vaccine. They used controls in the first 91 to 92, and then you looked at outcomes after that when they changed the definition of autism. And so that was a terrible study design that made it seem like autism was caused by the vaccine, when in fact, it was just a change in the definition. And then the other very common mistake is confounding variables or event frequency, and I've made up my own study on this one. This is the question I wanted to raise was, will waving a Houston Astros flag scare away New York Yankees fans? Well, I mean, it's a very good question, in my opinion. Well, if you do that study in downtown Houston, where there are no Yankees fans, you're going to conclude that, yes, it does scare away Yankees fans. But if you do it in downtown Manhattan, wave a flag with an Astros flag, you won't be able to find the person who was waving the flag. They'll be floating in the East River. And so that's why these are very confounding variables. So now I'm happy to discuss a number of trials. And by the way, this really happens in real life. So for example, the checkpoint inhibitors for lung cancer were used in many different types of cancers and was never found to be significant until the biomarkers were developed that selected out the patients who could be treated with checkpoint inhibitors. And now it's one of the cornerstones of lung cancer treatment, but you have to select the right patients for that thing. Okay. So this is why it's difficult to answer these questions. So I got a question, should I follow a specific diet for healthy aging? Well, again, so there was a large study that examined the link between long-term adherence to 8 very popular diets versus ultra-processed food consumption and how do they affect aging. And the researchers really tried. It was a longitudinal study. They followed 105,000 people over 30 years, and they assessed cognitive, physical, mental health, as well as their ability to live to age 70 without 11 different chronic disease. So only 9% of the participants achieved healthy aging, which is depressing enough. 66% of those were women. In the total cohort of 105,000 patients, 40% reached an age of 70. So not that, that's kind of depressing too. 23% remained free of 11 chronic diseases. 34% kept their cognitive function intact. 1 in 3. My sister might be one of those, I hope. 28% preserved the physical function, 27% maintained good mental health. So their findings were higher consumption of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, unsaturated fats, not kale in this study. That's not true, kale probably does. And low-fat dairy was associated with odds of healthy aging. And so it shows that results in a diet rich in plant foods with moderate inclusion of healthy animal base can promote healthier aging. So now think about that. A plant diet with moderate meat. That's what our ancestors ate 50,000 years ago. So I'm not so sure. Well, that's a good example of confounding variable because so many other things have happened to allow us to live longer. But they were only living to age 25 when they were eating that diet 50,000 years ago. Anyway, so that's sort of alternative healthy eating index diet was associated with the most beneficial outcomes. And the healthful plant-based diet, the least. So much for the vegan diet. Anyway. Another question. Supplements. Can vitamin pills replace what's missing in my diet? So there's a study that looked at 31,000 adults aged 20 years or older for 6 years. And the participants answered questions about the use of dietary supplements. And the outcome was all-cause mortality. And what they found was that the use of dietary supplements was not additionally beneficial. As long as you had adequate dietary vitamins through normal eating, that was associated with the reduction, and adding vitamin supplementation didn't do anything. There was one little caution thing: excess intake of calcium above what's called the tolerable upper intake level, which on a vitamin pill you'll see is UL in the directions. Too much calcium is associated with increased risk of cancer death. But again, it was associated with it. Doesn't mean that it causes cancer, but it is associated with it. So for all the people you sit around, I've been at breakfast where people put out their other vitamin pills. There's no evidence that that's beneficial. Unless you're vitamin deficient, there's no reason to do that. Okay, then this is a very common question. Can Ozempic or Wegovy help me lose weight? Right? Are there any downside approaches? Well, actually, both of them can help with weight loss. Studies have showed that when combined with lifestyle changes, both of these drugs are very helpful in losing weight. Wegovy clinical trials have shown a 15 to 20% weight loss over the course of a year, particularly at the higher doses. And Ozempic typically reduces weight by about 8 to 10% or 12%. but it's only approved for patients with type 2 diabetes. So these really should be in patients who are obese or have an elevated BMI, but it is helpful. The only issue is that there are some side effects, nausea, vomiting, GI complaints, fatigue, headache, and there have been some serious side effects. Pancreatitis, kidney problems, and thyroid tumors have been associated with them. But they're pretty dramatic. I mean, now I know a lot of people are taking it who were having trouble with their weight, and it really has been very helpful. Okay. Healthy living is killing me. Yes, ma'am. Exercise. How much exercise should the average person need? So for general health and longevity, they say about 150 minutes per week. This is the American Heart Association, or 75 minutes per week for vigorous exercise. And everyone is recommending these days 2 days a week of strength training. One question came in, can I trust someone on TikTok who advocates a particular approach to health? And the answer is not unless they're a scientist. The trouble is there's so much misinformation on social media. You really have to be very careful about taking advice from that. Back to some other questions. How has the RSV vaccine reduced the disease burden in older adults? Yes, it has. There was a clinical trial that showed it was very effective last year. Remember, for over 65, it's recommended you need one RSV shot. You should get that. Somebody asked about what COVID variant is circulating. I've talked a lot about Stratus or XFG. That's around. And if you want to know how to get your vaccine, or if vaccines are available, just call your pharmacist and see. Is measles still a threat in Texas? Not anymore. It's always a threat because we're under-vaccinated. Okay. Our own Harris County probably leads the way, but also Bexar County. Then one of our viewers noted that I mispronounced Bexar County last week. I blame this on the editorial staff of the videos here, so it's their fault, not mine. But it is true. I mispronounced Bexar County. But that proves that I am not a native Texan, even though my mother was born and raised in Texas. You know, it shows. But there's many other counties to trip you up. So I just thought I'd go over the difficult ones in Texas. Bexar, of course, is one of the more difficult ones. Guadalupe, not that hard, but Llano is actually Llano. Blanco is Blanco. My favorite one is what looks like it should be Basque, is Basque. Navarro, not Navarro. Erath instead of Erith. Not Montague is actually pronounced Montag in Texas. Real is Real. Terrell is Terrell. Sabin is Sabine. My favorite is Refugio. Nueces, Aransas, Comal County, Hayes, of course, Brazos. It's not Bowie, it's Bowie County, named after Jim Bowie. It's not San Jacinto, it's San Jacinto. Hidalgo, Nacogdoches, and San Saba are all the more difficult counties to pronounce. So hopefully I won't mess those up. So I want to end today with a bunch of shout-outs. First of all, congratulations to Dr. Paul Ling, Professor of Molecular Virology, who received the Duane Ellery Achievement Award for the American Association of Zoo Veterinarians. This awards to non-veterinarians who've done something really important to advance science of wild animal and zoos. And Dr. Ling, as you know, has led the screening of elephants for endotheliotrophic herpes virus, developed a vaccine, and he's terrific. Also, yesterday, Baylor joined the country in observing Patriot Day, not Patriots Day, but Patriot Day, to remember and honor the nearly 3,000 lives lost in the bravery of the first responders on the 3 sites on the September 11th attacks in 2001. Voter registration is a privilege. Remember, voting is very important. We have an opportunity to register here on campus. Many of the Baylor community may be new to Houston, and other new voters simply need to check their voting status. But next week, September 15th and 18th, the League of Women Voters will be at Cullen Building, E Hallway, above the cafeteria from 11 to 1 to answer questions about voter registration. Everybody should try to register to vote. And then finally, September 15th will mark the 125th anniversary of our founding in Dallas. Just 43 years later, the school moved to Houston to become the founding institution of the newly created Texas Medical Center. Over the last 125 years, we have built a strong foundation of excellence in education, research, and patient care. And this is a big, important milestone for us. We also have a special one-day fundraiser on September 16th with the goal of raising $125,000 to reflect our 125th anniversary. Anyway, no more questions. Anyways, hope you have a wonderful weekend. I can't wait to see you next week.